You know, when I was in middle school, there was a girl who sat in front of me in shop class who said there were two things she knew a lot about: the Titanic and the legend of Anastasia, the missing Romanov princess. Curiously, people interested in the Romanov story almost never seem to mention the disappearance of Alexei, even though that caused nearly as many questions. Anyway, I'll do a whole other video on that mystery. So I saw this documentary, Titanic's Final Mystery, on Netflix, and I gave it a try. It's a really good documentary, and it goes about answering a lot of the final questions. I tried to show it to my mom some time ago, and I couldn't find it anymore. Then recently it reappeared on Netflix again, and I thought I'd probably better watch it again and talk about it before it disappears again. If you're interested in the Titanic story, I highly suggest you watch this. It's not a movie, it's a documentary, so if you don't like documentaries, that might be a problem. However, I'm a fucking nerd and I love documentaries. Netflix has this to be watched instantly, so take the opportunity to do so before it's gone again. This program follows Titanic historian and author Tim Malton as he goes about reconstructing not so much the events that happened on the last night of Titanic or the build of the ship, but the environment surrounding the events that took place, and how the very unusual conditions played a major role in the events that unfolded, which, as an environmental scientist, I found fascinating. There are revelations in this that I had never heard of in the story of Titanic before. A lot of hypotheses that I had heard before assumed the Titanic had been poorly built, that higher quality material and components had been sacrificed for the speed of construction, and it is true that at the time, the shipbuilding companies were in intense competition to produce the largest and fastest ships to feed the massive shipping and travel industry in the early 20th century across the Atlantic. And some compromises did take place, but Titanic was actually built very well. It was built like a battleship. Now, in the 97, the really famous one with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet and Celine Dion song. In the beginning, the treasure hunters are showing a simulation of the sinking of the ship, and Mr. Lovett says to Rose, the iceberg punched holes into the hull of the Titanic, kind of like Morse code dots and dashes. That's not what happened. And previously, for a long time, it was assumed that the ship's hull had been gored and gashed wide open. That's not what happened. The most recent that I've heard is that it was actually a small dislodging of the rivets and hull plating, a very small wound, in fact. The ship largely held up in the collision with the iceberg, just obviously not enough. It was subjected to a pressure that would have sunk any ship, no matter how strong. Now, I've also watched documentaries that say that had Titanic hit the iceberg head-on, it would in fact have survived, which, given that the crew had about 30 seconds from the time they had spotted the iceberg to the time of collision, I'm surprised they didn't just try that. Anyway, what this show ultimately leads into, and I'm not going to spoil it, it eventually explains the environment created by the air and water conditions that night, and those played a far bigger role in the fate of the Titanic than anyone before had guessed. So it's really worth it to watch this.